Hello everyone. Can I just check that everyone at the back can hear okay? How is it back there? Can you give me a wave if you can hear it all right? Yep, fantastic. Thank you. So, yeah, welcome to God and Beer. Friends, Roman Catholics, countrymen, lend me your beers. I'm going to be trying to work a few Shakespeare quotes into my dialogue tonight. So if you hear a Shakespeare quote or maybe an allusion to a Shakespearean play, I want you to just yell out where it's from. If you recognise it, oh, that's from, where is that quote from? Is that from Julius Caesar? Friends, Angela, can you help me out? Where's that quote from? Friends, Roman countrymen. Julius Caesar, right. So if you hear one, and you want to get the point, you know, we're playing for points here, you've got to yell out what play that quote was from. Andy Mullins, I might have to exclude you from this game, otherwise you'll get them all. So yeah, welcome to God and Beer. This is a really exciting event. This is the first live God and Beer that we've had. We had one last year during one of the lockdowns, we were forced to do it online. So this is the first one that we've done live. This is fantastic. It's really exciting. This new event, which is an initiative of the Knights of the Southern Cross, Dandenong North Branch, it has several different purposes. You know, maybe if I could ask Carmen if you could see if you can get him to turn off that music. Thanks, mate. So yeah, a couple of different purposes why we decided to organise this event, God and Beer. One is social, just to bring people together and have a good time. You know, meet fellow Catholics, enjoy each other's company, enjoy a nice meal, and you know, have a good time. Another one is spiritual. So we want to strengthen the faith of people. We want people to come along and deepen their understanding and their love of the Catholic faith. That's one of the key goals of this event. And a third purpose is inspirational. You know, I really hope that through these events, through listening to these great speakers like Angela and many more, that people will get ideas, will get inspiration, and that it will lead to some kind of renewal in the church. You know, the church is going through some struggles. We're in a challenging time, and rather than complain and whinge about it, we need to grow, we need to build, we need to renew the church. So those are the reasons why we're doing God and Beer. Now, why are we having this speaker? Why Angela Schumann? Why is she here tonight to talk to us about Shakespeare and Catholicism? Is it just going to be a tale of sound and fury signifying nothing? Or is there going to be more to it? No one? Tempest, we've got a Tempest. Hamlet, that's right, it's Hamlet, isn't it? No? Oops. I'm not a Shakespeare scholar. It's Macbeth, isn't it?
Yeah.
There we go. So, why are we doing this topic? Well, I met Angela earlier this year and found out she's just completed a PhD, a doctorate on Shakespeare and Catholicism at Monash University, and pretty soon she's going to be Dr. Angela Schumann, right? And when she told me what her thesis was about, my eyes glazed over and I fell asleep, and I just thought, words. But no, I'm joking. I was fascinated because what the topic that she's done, she'll elaborate on it more, but basically through her reading of Shakespeare, she started to get an idea that Shakespeare had been heavily influenced by the Catholic faith, and he'd used that the influence had found its way into the characters of his plays. And this was, I believe, a fairly new idea in the academic world of, you know, people talking and writing about Shakespeare. I mean, there's been 1,000 books written about Shakespeare, but not much had been written on this idea. And, you know, I went to Monash University myself, just around the corner from here, and it's a challenging place to be a Catholic, I found, in many ways. You know, not everything, not all the time, but plenty of times you were challenged as a Catholic. And when Angela told me she's writing this thesis and you know, doing this research into how Catholicism influenced Shakespeare, I was full of admiration. I thought, this is awesome. You know, in this secular, somewhat atheistic environment, she's bringing her faith to bear on the work that she's doing there in a really interesting and profound way. I think you might have read in the advertising for this event that Angela actually came runner-up in the university-wide thesis. They had a competition to see who's got the best description of their thesis, who can make it the most interesting, and Angela came second in that across the whole university out of hundreds of PhD candidates. So it's something really special in that. And you know, I imagined her going into this hostile enemy territory, the university of the modern day, sword in hand, fighting against the dragons of atheism and secularism in the academic world. And I just thought, this is so awesome. I really wanted to give her the opportunity to speak at God and Beer and tell us more about it. But you know, she's not making any kind of tribe. Sorry. She's not making any kind of tribal or parochial argument that Catholicism's best or that Shakespeare belongs to the Catholic Church or anything like that. She's using her intelligence and a lot of painstaking research to show how Shakespeare was influenced by the Catholic faith, and I just think that's really fascinating. Why is it worth talking about Shakespeare? Well, you know, I think everyone has heard of him, and many people recognise him as the greatest writer of the English language that has ever lived. He's so influential, even if we don't watch Shakespeare's plays or movies based on his plays ourselves, which many of us do, and you know, they're being remade all the time. So much of the other literature and TV shows and movies that we do watch has been heavily influenced by Shakespeare's work. Once you see it, once you know that Shakespeare's work enough to recognise it, you'll see half the TV shows and movies that we watch are basically, they took a Shakespeare play, changed the names of the characters and maybe updated the context a little bit, and there's your TV show, there's your movie, already done. They borrow so heavily from Shakespeare. So it's incredibly influential in our culture, and for Angela to be deepening our understanding of Shakespeare and showing how he was influenced by Catholicism, I think that's incredibly powerful. It shows the beauty and the truth of the Catholic faith and how it has such a positive impact on the world. And I know Shakespeare can be a challenge. You know, I experienced this myself just recently. I was taking a class, doing I'm a teacher, and I was taking a class for someone else's English class, and the students had been studying this Shakespeare play, Twelfth Night, which I was totally unfamiliar with, didn't know anything about. And so we're watching a video of this Shakespearean play, Twelfth Night, in this class, and I'm struggling. I'm watching it, and I don't know who's doing what, I'm not sure what they're saying, I'm lost. And I was just about to give up when, thankfully, there was a technical problem with the video. I mean this in a good way, and I had to fix that, and so it gave me the opportunity to say to the students, girls, I'm a bit lost, can someone tell me what's going on? Who are these people? What are they talking about? What's going on? They explained just briefly what the plot was and who the characters were, what was going on. And all of a sudden, it was such a big transformation. I got it, and I was totally absorbed in the play. It was fantastic. Shakespeare requires a little bit of work, is my point. It's not easy to digest. You've got to do a little bit of work, and then it's incredible. So I guess part of why I wanted to do this topic, as well as everything else I've said, is we can't afford to leave Shakespeare and alone and say, oh, that's just for hoity-toity people who go to plays and things like that. It's not for everybody. Big mistake. Shakespeare, we can't afford to lose that. As Catholics and as members of Western civilization. So anyway, I've talked enough. I think I better let Angela share her wisdom and her learning about Shakespeare and Catholicism. Thanks, Angela.
Thank you so much, John. That's the best plug anyone's ever given me. I'm bringing you to all my speaking events from now on. one little response that I do want to make about Monash is that I have found it an incredibly supportive environment for my research. I've really felt very, very welcomed and supported by the people in the university. And my supervisor is an atheist, and he helped me to understand the influence of the Catholic tradition on Shakespeare, which I think is pretty impressive. So I have to just give that little shout out to my supervisor Peter Groves and the people at Monash. They really have been a wonderful research environment to work in. So, in my talk tonight, I want to go over 4 questions with you. Hopefully it won't take too long, and then there'll be plenty of time for your own questions. So, number 1, what's the big deal about Shakespeare? Which I feel like John has beautifully answered, but I'm going to have a go too. Number 2, was Shakespeare a secret Catholic? We all want to know. Number 3, what was his relationship to the Catholic tradition? What was the influence of Catholicism on his work? And then finally, why should we care? So we get stuck in. What is the big... There was going to be slides, by the way, with these questions on them, but I trust your memories, and the USB didn't work. So what is the big deal about Shakespeare? I'm assuming that because you've come here, you have your own answer to that question. I'm assuming that we've got a lot of lovers of the bard here, or you just want an excuse to drink on a Monday night, which is also fine. But let me tell you my answer to that question. Let me tell you the reason that I've spent the last 8 years devoting my life to research of this man. And it is this. Shakespeare was writing at a time before modern psychology as we know it existed at all. And yet he gives us characters as though he had read the DSM-V, as though he had done his Freud, as though he had done all of his psychology training. He gives us characters that practice self-deception. He gives us characters that have cognitive dissonance. He gives us characters that are as complex as we are, and in them we see ourselves. This is why he, of all the playwrights in that period, still endures today, and we can still find so much in these plays. Who reads John Lilly anymore? Exactly. So I want to give you one of my favourite examples of this complexity. And it's in one of my favourite characters, which is Lady Macbeth. We've all heard of Lady Macbeth. Even if we're not super into Shakespeare, everybody knows out damned spot, Lady Macbeth, blood, blood, blood. So a quick recap, if we need it, for what Macbeth is about. Macbeth and his wife, Lady Macbeth, are kind of up there in the hierarchy in Scotland, but they think it would be a good idea to kill their king. They manage it. They become king and queen themselves. And the play then explores what happens to them as a consequence of this. We watch them crumble piece by piece, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And when we look at this play, oh, am I going to get feedback? Oh no, good, I can walk around. When we look at this play, it's one of the most bloody plays in literature, so much so that there's a tradition that saying the name of it itself is cursed, so people will just refer to it as the Scottish play. And when we look at this play, there's a temptation to sit in the seat of judgment, to feel so superior to these characters and look down upon them and say, I would never do that again. I have my flaws, but I would never do that. At the end of the play, a character calls them the butcher and his fiend-like queen. And of course we know that a fiend is a devil or a demon. And yet, when we take a closer look at the play, we realise Shakespeare's doing something totally different here. Even once they've killed the king, I mean, who can relate to that? And yet they start hearing noises. They're like, did you do that? I didn't say anything. Get to bed. People are coming. And you find yourself weirdly barracking for them. You're like, shh, just go to bed. No one will notice. No one will notice. You feel yourself relating to them in this really disturbing way. Why is that? There's this moment in the play, and it's subtle and often we skim over it. But Lady Macbeth, she's likened to the witches. She specifically prays to have her humanity taken away from her. Unsex me here, fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. Take away my humanity, take away my nurturing female qualities, make me into a demonic being. And we think that she's achieved this. And yet there's a moment where she's successfully gotten the guards drunk. That was the plan. I'll get them drunk, you come in, Macbeth, kill the king, smear his blood on them, we'll get away with it. Genius, not the most intellectual characters in Shakespeare. So there's this moment where the guards are passed out and she's alone in the room with the sleeping king. She could have just done it herself, and yet she doesn't. She backs off and she walks away and she says to herself, had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it. Now let's take a moment and have a look at that. Had he not resembled my father as he slept, I would have killed him. Okay, so the King of Scotland, who's been staying at your house, looks like your dad, but you never noticed it until he was asleep in the dark. So, of course, what we're seeing here is kind of a proto-Rorschach test. You know, I think they still actually do them, where they show you like a bunch of ink blots and they're like, what do you see here? And you say, me killing my childhood kitten or something, and it reveals something about you. The King of Scotland doesn't look like Lady Macbeth's father, but in that moment, her conscience that she's tried so hard to destroy is there beneath the surface, and it stops her. And in order to explain this to herself, she says, oh, he just looks like my dad, so I couldn't do it. And of course, as we know, this conscience which is constantly trying to come out and which she's constantly stifling eventually leads to her death. So we have this beautiful psychological richness in this one line. Had you not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it. We can see here evidence of a subconscious in this character, which is extraordinary for this time period. And we haven't even exhausted that one line. So we've done a psychological reading of it. We could also do a theological reading of it. Let's think about that. So, had he not resembled my father as he slept? Okay, so he's a king, you're calling him my father, he's kind of the source of all life and goodness in the land, he's innocent and he's unjustly killed, which leads to the destruction of souls. Who might the king be a symbol for? Yeah, so we can read it, we can do a Christological reading of it as well. And that's just one little kind of boring line in the whole play. We could move on to the next line and it would yield us just as much richness. That is my answer to the question of what is the big deal about Shakespeare. So, second question, was Shakespeare a Catholic? This is the question that it's not true to say I get asked all the time by Catholics, rather Catholics come and tell me the answer to this question all the time. But I would like to respond now, and I would like to give you my response to this question. Was Shakespeare a secret Catholic? So in order to answer this question, we need to understand the context in which Shakespeare was writing his plays. So I hate dates, so I'll only give you two. Shakespeare was born in 1564, died in 1616. Those are the only numbers I'll give you. So we think of him as like second half of the 1500s, we've got Shakespeare. So what massive event happened across Europe and England earlier on in the 1500s?
Reformation.
I like you. The Reformation, exactly. So for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, in the West, Christianity was united as the Catholic Church, as we all know, and then Martin Luther comes along in the early 1500s nails his 95 Theses to the door, and we get the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. This sends seismic shockwaves throughout Europe, and all of a sudden, beliefs that were not questioned are now questioned and challenged. We get bloody wars. We know all of this, and Protestant churches are born. The Reformation gets going in England later than in Europe. We've got Henry VIII kicking around at the time. We all know Henry VIII and his 6 wives. And he was actually, at one point, named by the Pope as defender of the faith. He was at one point a die-hard Catholic, and then he wanted a divorce. So the Reformation in England gets started because Henry really likes Anne Boleyn. And so we have this great period of turmoil. Henry, flushes out the monasteries, turns out monks who have been there for 1,000 years. We get the beginnings of the Reformation coming through here. Henry technically dies a Catholic in schism with the church, but the wheels are turning. Henry's young teenage son, Edward, comes to the throne. He only rules for like 5 or 6 years or something. And in this period of time, the Reformation is very strongly pushed. He is very much a strong reformer. Edward dies. It's the time period. Mary comes to the throne, and she is known as Bloody Mary, and she's a Catholic queen, so she restores Catholicism. It's all back on again. Glue the heads back onto the statues. We're saying our rosaries. We're praying for the dead again. It's all happening. Mary dies. Elizabeth comes to the throne. Lizzie, as I call her because we're quite close. She lives, which is a big deal. She lives. She's on the throne for like 40 years or something. Feel free to fact check me. I don't like numbers. But decades she is on the throne, and under her, England is politically stabilised. And it is stabilised as a Protestant nation. Now, she is not a particularly spiritual woman. She is a politician, and she wants this stability. So as long as you show up to church and as long as you acknowledge her as the head of the church, she's happy. She famously said, "I don't want to peer into your bosom. I don't care what goes on in here. You just toe the line. You just come to my church. You acknowledge my power. That's all you got to do." Unfortunately, if you're a really hardcore Protestant reformer or you're a really die-hard Catholic, I will cut off your head. But other than that, we'll all get along. So this is the world into which Shakespeare is born. All of this turmoil takes place over about 30 years. Shakespeare's parents were born in an undeniably, unquestioningly stable Catholic world, and Shakespeare is born 2 years after Lizzie takes the throne. This is the England in which he lives. And when we think about that, we realise that there are now different factions living in this society. So you've got your faithful Reformed Protestants. Yes, easy, done. You've got your Catholics who have now been pushed underground. We know, we've got our Edmund Campions, we've got our Jesuits coming through, we've got people that hung onto the faith for so many years with such hardship. We've also got what I call our flip-floppers, or our wishy-washy people. Just, the government's changed the religion, guess we're going to that church now. Who am I to say it should be any different? Who just follow whatever moral trend is happening at the time. And then I think we have a fourth group as well. What happens if you break a bone and then you reset it? And then you break it again, and then you reset it, and you break it again? It gets weakened. And for the first time, what we start seeing is people whose faith in faith itself is weakened. Is people who say, well, what is truth then? If the government can just tell us what is truth and what is not, if the government controls what I have faith in, how can we even know what is real? These schools of thought are beautifully expressed in the play of Hamlet. So Hamlet is set in Viking Denmark, back in pre-Christian pagan times. But Hamlet has also just been studying at Wittenberg University, apparently. Does anyone know the significance of Wittenberg University?
That's where the Thesis were played.
Yeah, that's right. That's Martin Luther's university. So that is a clear reference to the Protestant Reformation. So it's somehow set in Viking Denmark, but it's also somehow set during the Reformation. Now, the action of Hamlet kicks off when the ghost of his father appears to him. His father's recently died. The ghost shows up and says, "Hey, Hamlet, my brother killed me. Your uncle Claudius, who just married your mum, he killed me. Go and get revenge. By the way, I'm in purgatory." So purgatory is obviously a uniquely Catholic belief. So now we have a Catholic world in the play at the same time. Oh, and by the way, that famous speech, "To be or not to be, that is the question." You know, Hamlet's musings are often about the futility of life itself, are often about meaninglessness, are often about the unknowability of truth. So we have that skeptical, nihilistic, atheistic worldview in Hamlet as well. There are others, but let's just stick with these four for now. These worldviews are beautifully expressed in this moment at the start of the play. And again, it's one of those boring bits that you usually skip over, but it's when Horatio is confronted by the ghost. So Horatio's name, Ratio, it's Latin for reason. He is the reasoning, skeptical character. So what happens when a kind of atheist is confronted with a ghost? He says to it, "Stay, illusion." So he's showing his atheism here, and the ghost says nothing. It's nighttime, it's kind of cold, it's kind of creepy, and he gets a little bit unnerved. So he addresses it like a good Protestant would. Now, if you're a Reformed Protestant, you don't believe in purgatory. So if you see this, if you see grandma wandering around, that ain't grandma, that's a demon pretending to be grandma. And he says that, "Why are you here, demon?" And again, the ghost says nothing. And he gets unnerved. And so he reverts back to the Catholicism of his childhood. And he says, "Are you here for prayers? Are you a soul in purgatory? Is that why you've come back?" And the ghost says nothing. And it unnerves him again, and he reverts back to this older pagan superstition. And he says, "Is the buried treasure somewhere here? Is that why you've come back?" This only happens over a few lines. And again, it looks kind of boring at first. But what we can see here is this beautiful layering of these belief systems, like sediment, one on top of the other. That's the crux of the play of Hamlet, by the way. People often misunderstand it, and they say, it's about a young man who can't make up his mind. He procrastinates. See what happens when you don't do your homework. This is what will happen. But they miss the point, of course. The point is, which worldview is the right one? If you're a good Viking son, the ethical thing to do is go and kill the man who killed your father. But if you're a Christian, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, you'll go to hell. What is truth? This is the question that the play asks. So, okay, we're not here to find out if Hamlet's a Catholic, we're here to find out if Shakespeare is a Catholic. So the question is, to which of these groups did Shakespeare belong? Now, the first thing we do when we want to learn something about a historical figure is obviously we look at their life, we look at their personal writings, and we don't get a lot of answers here. We know that Shakespeare was most likely raised a Catholic. His mother's family, the Arden family, was a strong Catholic family. His cousin, Saint Robert Southwell, was a martyred Jesuit. But we also know that just because you're raised in a Catholic family doesn't mean you're going to stay Catholic. We don't get diary entries from Shakespeare. We don't get any conclusive evidence about his life that would tell us about his personal beliefs. So that's unsatisfying, but people really, really want to know. So what do? What do we have? Well, we have a hell of a lot of fiction coming from Shakespeare, so they look to that for answers. And unfortunately, we can see the problem with doing this. So there are Catholic scholars, or people who call themselves scholars, who have published things that say, Hamlet, the ghost, remember? Purgatory? Purgatory is Catholic. Shakespeare's a Catholic. Proof, game, set, match. And they go and publish Shakespeare in an anthology of Catholic writers, giving him like a page and a half and thinking that that's proved the centuries-old question of whether or not Shakespeare was a Catholic. But of course, the problem with this is that then if you're a Protestant, you could say, Wittenberg University, there are so many Protestant references in Shakespeare, so therefore Shakespeare was a Protestant. What about, as John said earlier, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That is the nihilist anthem. So by the same logic, Shakespeare must have been a nihilist. And people do that, by the way. I was tutoring a year 11 boy and he's doing Macbeth. And I told him about this. I said, people sometimes look at this play and they take that line and they think that the play is a nihilist play, that it's saying that life has no meaning. And this 17-year-old boy was outright, when he was outraged, he said, "Are you serious? Can't they see that the play is telling you don't mess with natural law?" But we see the problem here, and of course if there were any Vikings amongst us, they would say, aha, Hamlet is set in Viking Denmark. Shakespeare's obsessed with revenge. It's all throughout his plays. Shakespeare must have been a Viking. So, as Catholics, we are lovers of truth, and we make a commitment to truth. And we must resist twisting the truth to suit our narrative. Of course we want to claim Shakespeare as a Catholic. Everybody wants to claim Shakespeare. But unfortunately, unless some historical evidence is unearthed to that effect, we can't simply take the fiction of a person and mash it onto their biography, especially not when we're cherry-picking like that. So the next time that somebody says to you, "Did you know that Shakespeare was a Catholic?" I want you to say, "Do you know that?" So, okay, that was deeply unsatisfying, wasn't it? You drove all the way here, and that's the answer that we get to that one question. I'm disappointed with you. So you say, well, what can you tell us about Shakespeare and Catholicism then? What can you tell us about Shakespeare and the Catholic tradition? And that is the right question. What impact did the Catholic tradition have on Shakespeare's art? How may it have formed him as an artist? That is what fascinates me. Here's what we can know about it. First of all, Shakespeare has an incredibly deep and complex and nuanced knowledge of Catholic theology and tradition. He really knows his stuff. So many of his plays are set in Catholic countries or in Catholic times in his own country. So many of the jokes in his plays hinge upon a nuanced knowledge of Catholic theology, as do so many of the plot points. He really, really knows his theology. Secondly, we can tell that Shakespeare also has a respect for the Catholic faith. And what's the best way to know this? There was something that was outrageously fashionable at the time, and it was called anti-fraternal satire. And it basically means, as we know, making fun of priests and monks and nuns. Everybody did it. Everyone did it. Chaucer does it. Everyone does it. They think it's just so funny. Shakespeare never does it. He's the only person that never does it. You'll get bad people in Shakespeare impersonating a religious figure. Or you'll get a religious figure making a mistake, but they had good intentions, such as Friar Lawrence in Romeo and Juliet. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work out too well. But you never get this kind of savage pleasure in making fun of a clerical figure. And that is extraordinary. That is extraordinary. So we can say that he had a respect for the Catholic faith. And finally, he had a fascination with it. As he did with many other creeds, he had a fascination with paganism and with the classics. He loved to play with Reformation theology as well, but yes, he had a fascination with Catholic theology. One of my favourite examples of this is, it's in Hamlet again. So there's a beautiful detail. When the ghost appears to Hamlet and says, "My brother killed him," pretty upset about that. He says, he crept up on me when I was sleeping in the garden and poured poison in my ear. And we can think about, you know, if we want to do a biblical reading of that one, it's very rich. But he says, I was killed. So he's specifically unhoused, disappointed, unannealed, something like that. He specifically lists the final sacraments that he was denied. I didn't get to make my final confession. I didn't get to receive communion. I didn't get anointing of the sick. I was killed in the blossom of my sin, with all of my sins heavy upon my head. And that's a motif that runs right throughout the play. When Hamlet decides to kill his old school friends, essentially out of spite, he's a great guy, Hamlet, he specifically sends the instructions, he doesn't do it himself, but he sends the instructions to kill them, no shriving time allowed. We know that shriving means confession, so he's specifically saying, don't let them make a final confession before you kill them, kind of hoping that maybe they'll go to hell. They'll still have a couple mortals on their head that they hadn't confessed yet. Again, at the end of the play, when Hamlet finally gets around to killing his uncle, he kills him with a poisoned chalice. And again, you know, we could think about potential, you know, Eucharistic symbolism here. But what that does is it means that Claudius cannot speak if he's being choked and drowned to death. He's taking away his ability to make a final confession before he dies. It's this wonderfully nasty, real Catholic way of getting at somebody that runs right throughout the play and makes it all the richer for it in a very dark way. Finally, I want to mention my research in this area as well. So, the thing that fascinated me initially about Shakespeare was the psychology of his characters. But I also love Catholic theology as well. And I was looking for an origin for this psychology because, as I said, the study of the human mind did not exist. The idea that the mind has a subconscious level to it, that we do things and we don't know our motivations for those things, wasn't around. So where was he getting this psychological model? I ended up looking at the Catholic tradition of confession for an answer, and gee willikers, I got one. So if you look at the development of the Catholic sacrament of penance, you see this very sophisticated behavioural model at work here. They didn't have the language for it, but they understood that as human beings, we hide bits of ourselves from ourselves. I don't want to see all the ugly bits. I don't want to see all the dark bits. That gets kind of locked away in the basement of my mind. And so when building this structure of confession, they took that into account. You have to confess to a priest. You can't just do it directly because you might not be honest with yourself. You have to confess to another person. There's a seal of confession that cannot be broken because we're more likely to be honest with us about ourselves if we know that nobody's ever going to hear it on this earth again. We have to examine our conscience regularly, and there were there was a lot of material to help you do that. There were lists of questions you could go through that might jog your memory, because guess what? We conveniently forget the things we don't want to remember about ourselves. You can read it, even in the Desert Fathers, you can read right through. If you look at the history and development of confession, there is this very sophisticated psychological model. So what does that have to do with Shakespeare's characters? What did Shakespeare care about confession? There are moments in Shakespeare that everybody knows are mimicking the sacrament of penance. So again, Hamlet, I can't help myself. There's this moment where Claudius prays and he talks about his guilt. Oh, my sin is heavy on me, it's rank and it smells to high heaven. And he uses that penitential language. But in my research, I discovered that there are hundreds of what I call quasi-sacraments of penance. There are hundreds of moments in which characters copy the elements of confession and they distort them. Instead of gaining self-knowledge, they use it to manipulate others and to deceive themselves. So what this research indicates is that Shakespeare took the sacrament of penance and used it as a scaffold to create these complex characters. That's an extraordinary thing. And I mean, John was right when he said that the Academy often misses the value of Catholic theology. We say, oh, the Dark Ages, what could they teach us? But in actuality, it seems as though they may have suggested to Shakespeare this sophisticated psychology that we see in his characters. And in my opinion, that is so much more interesting than whether or not Shakespeare was a Catholic. That is so much more rich. So, final question. Why should I care? I mean, I have a feeling that we do already, because, you know, you're not drinking a lot, so I have a feeling that you are here for the Shakespeare. But I will leave you with this final thought. As English speakers, we are inheritors of the work of one of the greatest geniuses that has ever lived. You can't translate this stuff I mean, you can get the story, but you cannot translate these subtleties. So the fact that we know our English well enough to read Shakespeare in his original language is an absolute privilege. Now, we share that with all English speakers. But then as Catholics, we have this connection to Shakespeare's original audiences that so many other people don't have. We believe in angels and fiends and shriving before we die. We believe in all of this ridiculous stuff, just as they did. So sometimes when scholars look at these people, it feels very alien. They're like, why would people have cared about that? I don't think they really did. But we get it. We are able to understand some of these elements of the plays in ways that a lot of people can't. That is also an extraordinary privilege, a humbling privilege. So I do, again, I feel that you already do read your Shakespeare, but if you don't, I encourage you once again to have a look at it, because you have such an incredible angle and such an incredible insight, which is really a very exciting thing, and it really is a gift. So yes, I encourage you and congratulate you for taking the time to meet and walk with one of the giants on whose shoulders we stand. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Angela. That was wonderful and really enlightening. I couldn't help but get excited at certain points during that because I'm not an expert in Shakespeare. You know, I'm a what do you call it? Like a part-time Shakespeare admirer. I'm not deep into it, but I have enough knowledge of it to appreciate how awesome it is. And I feel like, having heard your talk tonight, I now have an even deeper appreciation. And I feel like next time I'm watching a Shakespearean movie or a play or what have you, I'll enjoy it that much more. So thank you. Now we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. I'll see if this one's any better. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A, but I'm going to abuse my privilege as the MC to ask the first question. And my first question is this. Let's say there was a really lazy person, like myself, who wanted to give people the impression that I'm an expert in Shakespeare, but wasn't really willing to do the work required of reading and watching all the plays. Do you have any tips or shortcuts that I could use that might, allow me to fool people into thinking I really know my Shakespeare?
That's okay. Thank you.
Oh my, yeah, I do want it. I do.
Thank you. Okay, so I gave a version talk a couple years ago, and I can see that John's seen it. And I did do this bit at the start, but I left it out because I knew that this audience would be more sophisticated, and that of course you wouldn't need this little life hack that I had developed. But okay, John's asked for it, so if you're like John, here is my hack. So 8 years of postgraduate research, and this is what I've come up with. So if you don't know your Shakespeare, but you want to bluff your way through and you want to sound very educated and sophisticated, this is how you do it. So step 1, you need to have the name of an obscure Shakespeare play as your favourite. So we're going to pick Henry VI, Part 3. Because nobody ever makes it through to Part 3. Most people don't even know that there's Part 3. So when somebody asks, what's your favourite Shakespeare play? It's Henry VI, Part 3. They're not going to know anything about it, and they're going to feel incredibly intellectually intimidated by you because there's just something super obvious like Hamlet or something. And then step 2 is whatever the conversation is, whatever is being said or whatever is being asked of you, you simply use this one comment. You try to say it under your breath. You let the other people talk for a little bit, and when they've simmered down, you just kind of sail into the groove and you say, so many layers. That's all it takes. And they will think that you know your stuff. There you go.
Someone must have dropped this. Is it a dagger I see before me?
Hamlet.
Who invited this guy?
Sorry, I love my dad jokes. All right, we've got a bit of time for some questions, so I will take this microphone around. We might have to do the turn on and off thing as each one gets used. And we've got a question just here.
Just want to know if Anne was a secret Catholic too.
Do you mean Anne Hathaway? Okay, so when you say... stand over. It's good, because I think it's just my voice. I was feeling...
I don't like it, John.
Okay, good. I was going to say I was feeling too close to the people at the back anyway, so I thought it would be wise to retreat. Okay, so the way you phrased that question was out of secret Catholic too. Well, I don't know if Shakespeare was. I don't think we can know if Shakespeare was. And I don't know a lot about Anne. His mother Mary was. But I just don't know, and I don't think there's evidence that tells us whether she was. So you might have your own thoughts on that, but I don't know.
Thanks, that was great. You were talking about different worldviews, religions. I'm interested in knowing if there's anything interesting to say about the contrast between the Church of England and the Puritans, or the other more radical Reformation that was going on. And that debate, but also the debate over the church and the state and whether we should have an established religion or not, because that was part of the turmoil in that time. Is there anything interesting to say about that? Does that affect Shakespeare at all?
Really good questions. So, yeah, it is important to understand that the Reformation wasn't just moving from A to B, you're Catholic, now you're Protestant. Even the term Protestant wasn't around at the time. It's a term that we use anachronistically. There were many, many different factions and churches and belief systems. There were many of them. And one of the most extreme is the Puritans. And we still understand that word today, people who, don't believe in, fun or smiling or, any, like the flesh is bad, sexuality is bad, eating too much is bad, enjoying what you eat is bad. So there is this kind of more extreme kind of Puritan group, if you will. And there are a few characters in Shakespeare who do strongly resemble the Puritan type character, and they're not presented well. Shakespeare doesn't seem to have a lot of respect for the Puritan. So we get, in my favourite play, Measure for Measure, see again, kind of obscure, you're a little bit intimidated if you don't know that one. So in Measure for Measure, one of the main characters, Angelo, is clearly this puritanical figure. At one point he says to the judge, I hope you'll have cause to whip them all, like everybody should be punished. He's above the flesh, he's above it all. And we find that he's quite psychologically unstable, and then of course he gets feelings for a girl and he just kind of falls apart and thinks he must be a monster. So we get this very unsympathetic representation of puritanical characters here. There's one in Antony and Cleopatra as well. Shakespeare likes the kind of the earthy, messy, warm-blooded, rich humanity with all its flaws and imperfections. He doesn't seem to have a lot of time for the Puritan. And as for your second question about separation of church and state, I mean, Shakespeare has to tread very carefully. Any kind of criticism of a monarch has to be done very subtly. Richard II was often seen as a criticism of Elizabeth, and she even said to somebody, Richard is me, no, you're not that. But if we look at Shakespeare's representations of monarchs, you know the cliche, power corrupts. It would seem that he agrees with that. He is very hesitant about whether or not it's possible to have a good ruler. What does that look like? And we see, again, in Measure for Measure, the Duke, who is like the king, he runs around prying into people's personal business and spying on people and manipulating them and kind of peering into their bosoms spiritually, and he dresses up as a confessor and tries to hear women's confessions. It's like super creepy. But again, this idea of a ruler trying to overstep that political boundary and trying to get into your head and trying to control you spiritually is not represented well by Shakespeare. I think we can say he's not a fan of that. So, good question.
Thank you. Gee, I enjoyed that. Thank you very much. I'm just looking at the parallels a little bit between the times then and our times here. We've got a very sort of polarised, ideologically polarised community in Victoria, and even look at the States or wherever, right? And you realise that there's top-down agendas that have completely riven the population in one direction or the other. And we're seeing the same thing, in a sense, in Protestant times in England. It's just striking me that Shakespeare's got, in the Shakespearean theatre, he's got the pit and he's got a lot of the common folk coming along, and he's like it's like the Herald Sun versus the Age or something, isn't it? Sort of, he's appealing to the common man. And because the ideology is being driven from top down by whoever the monarch is, I think he's got the people on his side if he's taking a very, for want of a better word, conservative religious position. And I think it's he realises he's on his turf, just like your comment on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting to bring up. Shakespeare, my supervisor always says that Shakespeare writes two plays. It operates at two levels. He writes one for, he doesn't divide them by class, he divides them by intellect. So he says, you know, the peanut munchers down in the pit who just want kind of bawdy jokes, rah rah, exit chased by a bear, yeah, blood, who just want that. And then at the same time, for the more discerning, more intellectual, more perceptive viewer, the plays work on multiple levels. And it's really an interesting time because at the time, the only entertainment on a weekend, like to go to the MCG, was to either see like bear fighting or dog fighting, animals ripping each other up, to see human executions, or to go to the theatre. So you're not just getting hoity-toity, slightly pretentious PhD theatre students going to the theatre, you're getting everyone. So you need to write something for everyone. But in terms of the common man on the ground versus the government, I think yes, to an extent, absolutely. There are definitely criticisms of both Elizabeth and James, who were the two monarchs during Shakespeare's lifetime. James was a bit stupider than Elizabeth, so you could make fun of him a little bit more easily. People often say that the Duke, in Measure for Measure, represents King James. But at the same time, they are his patrons. They are the people who are paying him and also not killing him. His plays were, the King's Men or the Queen's Men. So I don't know if this answer is even very coherent, but there's a lot of pressure on Shakespeare. There's a lot of different audience that he is writing for. That's why it's so notoriously difficult to say, was he loyal to the secret Catholics? Because even if he was, he's not going to put that out there because he wants to keep his noggin on. And that's what makes his art so brilliant, because he is writing under all of this pressure. He's producing plays that work on so many levels and that are going to say so many different things to so many different people. One other great effect that it has, that he's writing in a time when there are so many different viewpoints and so many different kinds of people, is that he has this extraordinary empathy. He says, if you're a Catholic, what's that going to look like? What's it going to feel like? If you're a Jew, what's that going to look like? What's that going to feel like? If you're a reformer, what's that going to look like? What's that going to feel like? If you're an alien, an outcast, a stranger, a king, a peasant, a prostitute, what's that going to look like? What's that going to feel like? He gives everyone their humanity, except Puritans sometimes. But we get that incredible empathy coming through as well. I hope that was some kind of an answer.
I just have one thing to say. So many layers.
Thanks, Angela. You mentioned how, as English speakers, we have a particular access to Shakespeare's writings for our generation, but I guess one of the natural obstacles to appreciating the epicness of Shakespeare and the story and the impact it has on our culture is the old English, like the fact that I would try and read something from high school, but I would really struggle with that. So I guess my first question is there a place, is it sort of like, no, we can't read like a modern translation of Shakespeare in sort of modern English? And if that's the case, is there a good sort of commentary or a series or an author that you'd recommend that would be really good for us to access, that you've come across? Yeah.
Thank you, that is such a great question. And you're right, I say, it's so easy for us to understand. That's why I spent 8 years studying him, because I was too silly to just understand. Like some people say, I just read Shakespeare, I just open it up and just read it. I'm like, can you understand a word he's saying? Like, do you not need to study it? So I completely get what you're saying. My supervisor would kill me for saying this, but I do think that there is a place for modernised summaries and plot summaries. And I think it's a good idea if you're approaching a new play to just jump on YouTube and type in, you know, Macbeth plot summary, and you'll get an 8-minute cartoon video that just shows you what's happening. Or to even if you're starting off and you are struggling, get one of those, you know, student books that has the modern translation. Know that it's not going to do it justice, but just so that you can get a head around, like, okay, like this one is this one's sister and that's the dad, and then the dad killed the mum, but then he remarried the governess, and then the dog's there weirdly, and then they all kill each other, so that you know what's happening. I would also say watch it. Let the actors live it for you and breathe it for you and clothe it in flesh. It is meant to be performed, and if you get a good actor and a good production, even if you don't understand the words themselves, you can still understand what they're saying, if that makes sense. The BBC did a decent job in the 80s and 90s. They decided they would do every single Shakespeare play word for word, so they're bloody long, but that can be a good place to start. The other thing that I would say is get a good edition of the play, a scholarly one that has footnotes. Footnotes can sometimes look intimidating, but they're your best friend. You've got a scholar sitting there with you being like, oh, do you want to know what that word means? I'll tell you, I'll explain it to you. So the more footnotes, the better. I like the Arden series, the Arden Shakespeare series. I think they're up to their 3rd editions for everything now. I prefer the 2nd editions. They were back in kind of the 60s, 70s. The translations are a little bit more accurate, even a little bit less political. So if you want to approach a play, I would grab an Arden 2nd edition. You can get them cheap online. If you go to something like Abe Books or Booko.com, you can get them for like $10 each, secondhand copies. There's also another resource, which is one that I have created. I have a YouTube channel called the Shakespeare Whisperer, and in it I make, because what you're talking about is a passion of mine. Shakespeare should be accessible to everybody. You shouldn't have to do a PhD to know what's going on. It belongs to all of us. So I make short videos, like 5-7 minutes, on an interesting point about a play. You don't have to have read the play to go and watch that video. It explains it in normal language for normal people in a way that I think is exciting. So it's Shakespeare for everybody. Because I don't know about you, but I find if I've got a couple of points that kind of penetrate into a text, then I'm okay to go and read it myself. If I kind of know what I'm looking for, or I'm like, oh wait, he's lying the whole time. Okay, go, now let me read it, I see. So the Shakespeare Whisperer is that YouTube channel. I'm also doing a series with my supervisor on the play Measure for Measure, where we go through it in great detail, start to finish. We sit there and we hammer our way through. So if you want something a bit heavier, that's there as well. Yeah, so you asked for good commentaries. I've just given you my own, but I'm just going to do that. Otherwise, feel free to Google. There is a lot of stuff out there. So.
It seems there was a fair degree of risk in his writing. Do you think he did that deliberately? Was he aware of himself, do you think, that he was pushing the boundaries?
Like for his safety, like politically?
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. Yes. He really toes the line sometimes. And sometimes in the way that he represents monarchs, you're like, oh, how did he stay alive? He came very close with Richard II. People wanted to use this play to kind of G themselves up to go and revolt. He came really close, but he somehow managed to survive. And I mean, if you think about it, you know, who else is going to be able to talk their way out of a fine or out of getting arrested better than Shakespeare? But yeah, I think he was very aware of the delicate political nature of things and just how far he could push it. And sometimes he did just have to, he just had to please. Like at the end of the day, he needed to write plays to put food on the table. He needed to make money. Queen Elizabeth said she wanted a play with Falstaff in it again. He gave her The Merry Wives of Windsor, which is the only play that's set in contemporary England. Queen wants it, Queen gets it. So you've got a fun play, Merry Wives of Windsor. Even I think the play As You Like It has a certain bitterness to it. Like, fine, I'll give you what you want. Or even at the end of Richard III, we see clearly that order is restored and the right monarch is on the throne once again. Everything is as it meant to be. And who is the monarch that comes on the throne? Oh, it's the line that eventually Elizabeth will come from. So there's a very clear kind of appeasing of the current monarch. So yeah, I think he knew the risks. He toes the line. But yeah, he's very aware of the danger of going too far one way or the other.
Did they have patrons in any way?
Yeah, well, the monarchs.
Apart
Where
from
he's,
the monarch.
yeah, that's a good question. Earlier on, I mean, they sell tickets. I don't actually know who were Shakespeare's early patrons. That's going to be a Google. If anyone knows, tell us. I feel he would have. He had with his sonnets. He did write sonnets for patrons, yeah.
I'm sure you'll know next talk.
You better believe it. That's going to be question 5. Who were Shakespeare's patrons? Yeah, he writes his sonnets for patrons. And even then, though, you can't buy Shakespeare. You can't buy Shakespeare's genius completely. So we get all of these love sonnets, which on one level praise the beloved, but on another level criticise the beloved and gloat in the fact that the beloved is too stupid to realise they're being criticised.
One final question?
Sure, no one else wants to go? Okay. After this talk, we probably have the impression that Shakespeare is just this star that's just come from outer space and landed on Earth. Like, I want to know the context, because this amazing, sublime genius doesn't just happen in a vacuum. How did this happen? That's what I'm really curious about.
Interesting question. I mean, Shakespeare, I mean, you're right. Shakespeare, I think it's true when people say without the Reformation there would have been no Shakespeare. He's living at such an extraordinary time that he takes this complexity and this controversy and these different schools of thought and he uses them to build his art. He also, was very well educated. He never went to university, but, he's got his Latin, his Greek, he knows his classics, he's probably read Aquinas, he knows his Chaucer, he knows his Dante, he knows a few languages, like, the man knows his stuff, and yes, he constantly draws upon the intellectual tradition that comes before him. But at the same time, in another way, he is kind of like a star that just dropped to earth. He is a genius. He is a rare mind. He is an actual genius. He wrote his mother a letter when he was 7 years old or something that said, "Dear Mother, I am a genius. I don't need to go to school anymore." Well, she didn't listen. Who's the fool now? So I think it's both. He has an extraordinary mind, but also he's not writing in a vacuum. He's drawing on these great intellectual traditions around him.
Can we give Angela one more round of applause, please? So I think I said earlier, these are challenging times for Catholics in a lot of ways, politically, culturally, socially, the media environment. There's a lot of challenges. Some might even say this could be the winter of our discontent. And God and beer, we will be addressing a lot of challenging and heavy topics at various times, controversial things, juicy things, I like to think of them. But I really wanted to start this series with something fun, interesting, creative, and even beautiful. And I feel like that's exactly what Angela's given us tonight, so thank you, Angela. I want this event to be, as I said earlier, something that builds and leads to renewal. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for whinging about the terrible state of the world and the horrible divisions in society and in the church, and trying to address those sorts of things. But primarily, I want this to be something fun and beautiful. So thank you again. Now, as I was listening to Angela talk tonight, I couldn't help but wonder, Angela, do you do tutoring?
I do, John, I do. If anyone, I am not sure there are a lot of secondary school students in this room, but I do private tutoring of secondary school students. So if you have a child or a grandchild who's in need of an English tutor, I'm available. You can contact me through John through this event.
So obviously, if they're studying English, then Angela is going to be an enormous help and benefit to them. But I think as well, if you've got a child or grandchild who you want to see grow up to love and cherish the Catholic faith, I think Angela would be an enormously good influence on them. So definitely recommend. So just a few little bits of housekeeping to finish off. We're nearly done for the night. The next God and Beer is going to be in May. Originally we planned to do only 3 events this year, but recently I got excited and I thought I just want to do some more. So we're basically going to be doing 1 each month for the remainder of the year. And the next one's going to be on Monday the 9th of May. The speaker will be Father Frank Brennan, SJ, from the Society of Jesus. And he's going to speak on the topic Reflections on the Pell Saga 2 years on. So 2 years ago, Cardinal Pell was declared innocent by the High Court, and it was a really wonderful thing, but then COVID struck, and the last 2 years there hasn't been much of an opportunity to talk about this really important case, this almost historical event, the travesty of justice that occurred there, and Father Brennan is probably the most knowledgeable person on that topic. So he attended the trial every day. He's written a book about it. He's a lawyer by training. He knows the case inside and out, and he's going to give us some very interesting reflections on that event. So that's the next God and Beer on Monday the 9th of May. Come along at 6:30 if you'd like to enjoy a meal, and 7:30 the talk will begin, same as tonight. Now, I wanted to ask for your help this evening. Carmen, if you wouldn't mind handing around the tin. We've got a donation tin that I'm going to pass around now, and I'll just explain why we're asking for donations. It's totally voluntary. This event is free for people to attend. There's no requirement to pay or anything like that. But I'd like to ask for your help. The donations will serve several purposes. One is to allow us to thank our speaker. So if you'd like to thank Angela, you might want to make a donation to help us do that. Another one is to help us to promote God and Beer. We want to let everyone in Melbourne know about it so that more people will come along and enjoy it. And the money will help us to do that. It will also help us to access speakers from interstate and from overseas possibly. So occasionally there might be a speaker we want to fly in from Sydney or Brisbane or somewhere, or even someone who's coming from overseas. We'd like to get them to come along, which might cost money. And if we have a little bit of budget, then that will help us to do that. So that's what your donations will help us to do, to thank the speaker, to promote the event, and to access other speakers. The other way I was hoping that you could help is to help promote this event through your direct assistance. At the back on the table, Tony, do you mind? Actually, I've got some right here. I don't need. That's all right, Tony. I've got some flyers and posters, which I was hoping if people are kind enough, they could take with them. There's a table at the back. You can see Tony there holding them up. There's some flyers and posters there, which I'm hoping people will be kind enough to take with them tonight, and then take back to your home parish and ask your parish priest, would it be okay if we put this up on the parish notice board and put these flyers somewhere in the parish where people can access them. And I'll be sending an email. If you've joined the email list, hopefully everyone who came in put their name on the email list if you haven't already joined. And I'll be sending out an email just once or twice a month to let you know about the next God and Beer. And if you are able to forward, there'll be a little parish notice text at the bottom of those emails. If you can forward that to your parish priest or parish secretary and ask them to put it in the parish bulletin. That's going to help promote God and Beer and bring more people along, make it an even greater event. So I'd be very grateful for your assistance with that. Just grab as many flyers and posters as you would like from the back table, and keep an eye out for that email, and please forward it on to your parish priest. I'll be very grateful. Finally, at the beginning of the night I mentioned this event is an initiative of the Knights of the Southern Cross, which is a wonderful organisation for Catholic men. It's a volunteer service organisation. We do a lot of fundraising for different charities and other good causes in the church and also outside the church, helping people in need and many other things. And so if you'd like to know, if you're interested in the Knights of the Southern Cross, you'd like to know more, the man to talk to is Carmen Miranda. He's a former state chairman of the Knights of the Southern Cross, and he can tell you a lot more about it. So I encourage you to talk to Carmen if you'd like to know more. That's all from me for this evening. I hope you've enjoyed tonight, and I hope to see you again in May.
John, you want to do?
Yeah, thank you. The donation tin.
The donation tin will be at the end, so people just make a donation.
Yeah, we'll just leave it on the table. Thank you, and you can put some money in if you'd like.
Get them to follow God and Beer on Facebook.
Yes, and if you're on Facebook, please follow the God and Beer page on there. Thanks, everyone. Good night.